I first got into making visual art when I was 6 years old. I made drawings, and everyone around me said that my drawings were great. My parents, my siblings, my elementary school teachers, and friends. And people would stare at me while I drew, often for hours. And I loved drawing, and I also kind of felt a certain power that I had over the football players of elementary school. For example, I wasn't a jock. I was not exactly a nerd, but more in the nerd direction. But with my art, I was like this superhuman being, and I read comic books, and I had fantasies of swinging the skyscrapers in New York like Spider-Man or flying like Superman, and I could do that with my fingers and a pencil and paper. And then by the time became 12 years old, I'd already made hundreds of drawings, but now it was time to graduate to painting. So I started by making oil paintings, and I learned quickly how to use that technique. And I went to art school, and by the time I finished high school, I abandoned my ambition of being a comic book artist, uh, uh, and learned about conceptual art in art school in college, and wanted to be basically a conceptual artist, a contemporary artist who showed in galleries, and instead of slaving away like a comic book artist for uh, $25 a page, I would make 25,000 for a painting that I didn't even paint, which is another reason why I'm known, because I'm known as the artist who doesn't paint his own paintings. I'm sitting here in front of this easel, but Miguel is the guy who paints here. And then I have Alex and Yuri and Fabio and other assistants who paint my paintings in their own studios, and they deliver them to me, and then I sign them. But they painted my style, which I invented, so it's not as scandalous as it may appear. However, it was scandalous in the late 80s and early 90s, and that landed me on the Oprah Winfrey Show and the cover of New York Magazine and People Magazine and Vogue and all sorts of glossy magazines and newspaper articles. And Jeannie Moose from CNN came, and Robin Leach did a segment on me for Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous because of my arguably scandalous practice of having other people paint my paintings. Plus, I have other people who come up with ideas for me. Now, the justification for this is that they do it in my style, and they think like Kostabi. But in the 80s, I was a little bit more mischievous, and I would say things like, modern art is a con, and I'm the world's greatest con artist. Only a fool would buy a Kostabi. I don't paint them, I don't even think them up. And the press liked that back then. Now I don't say that. I mean, I just said that, but I was quoting my past self. I'm just kind of like having a dialogue with my past self here. Now I'm just very straightforward and tell it exactly like it is with no exaggeration. There was a time when I actually had 40 employees, but my usual maximum was around 27. Now I have a dozen or 10, much less. Back then, my ego wanted me to tell the press that I was bigger and better. In fact, I did this album cover for Guns N' Roses called Use Your Illusion, and my brother Paul Kostabi, who's also an artist and a musician, gave me the idea for the title, Use Your Illusion. And I sent the painting to my art show in Beverly Hills, and Axl Rose bought it. And when he saw the title, he flipped out and he said, "Oh my God, last night I wrote a song with lyrics that said, 'I bought me an illusion,' and put it on the wall." And so it was a case of life imitating art. And then he contacted me through his manager and asked me if he could use my painting plus my title. And I said yes. We had a deal. He gave me some money, and it sold 36 million copies so far. Then I asked my brother Paul, "How did you get that idea to title my painting "Use Your Illusion"?" Because my brother Paul gave me the idea for that, and he was vague at first, but finally I said, "Listen, everyone's asking me how did I come up with that title," and I say, "Well, my brother Paul gave it to me. How'd you come up with that title?" And then Paul finally told me the story. He said that he saw me using my illusion, and using illusions generally because. I'm like most people. I want fame and love and attention, and I'm capable of exaggerating. I haven't exaggerated here, but I exaggerated then. But my exaggerations became a reality. For example, when Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous called me up and said, "We want to do a segment on you," I didn't feel worthy because I didn't really feel that rich. And I didn't drive a Ferrari. I didn't have 3 blonde girlfriends, and there was nothing like that about my life that they usually featured. I didn't have a huge home with a big swimming pool, but I did have a big studio with 7 assistants painting for me, which is unusual. Uh, but I didn't think that was enough, so I figured the only way that this is going to make good TV is if I make it look bigger than it actually is. So I asked all my friends to come and pose as additional painting assistants. So it looked like I had 27. And Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous showed up with their cameras, and I had 27 assistants. The day before, I only had 7. So 20 of them were fake, but they didn't care. They may have even known that it was fake, but this was fake news before fake news. All they cared about was the spectacle. So they did this big piece on me, and Robin Leach loved it, and it made me extra famous. And with that fame came a lot of money, and with that money I was able to actually hire another 20 assistants for real. So my brother Paul Kostabi thought that was an example of how Mark Kostabi used an illusion, hence the title of the painting, which became the Guns N' Roses album cover. Well, for sure, Andy Warhol was the artist who I wanted to meet the most when I got to New York in the 80s. Perhaps if Picasso was still alive, it would have been Picasso, but Andy Warhol was the other towering giant of art history in the 20th century. So I really wanted to meet him, and I was very excited and starstruck to meet him. Usually I saw him at art openings, but I was a little bit fixated. I really wanted to become a good friend of his or more involved with him, so I'd call him up, and strangely, he would answer the phone himself sometimes, or the assistant who answered the phone actually would pass me to him. So I talked to him on the phone, and I saw him at a lot of art openings, and in New York, once in Chicago, and once we shared a cab ride. So we were not best friends like he was with Jean-Michel Basquiat, for example. But I knew him well enough, and he was very always in a good mood, witty, always smiling, teasing, and for example, he met me when I was bland looking, when I was, as my girlfriend at the time, Fontaine, said that I was just a piece of white bread, no peanut butter, no jelly. And she was a hairdresser, and she turned me into a blonde. And when I met Andy the first time, I met him several times when I had boring, what's dirty blonde hair, natural blonde, but dirty, not Billy Idol or Marilyn Monroe glamorous. But then, so Fontaine changed my hair color to be platinum blonde, and then I saw Andy at an opening for Jean-Michel Basquiat, and the first thing Andy said was, "Gee, Mark, you sure are more famous now that you're a blonde." And it didn't register because I didn't feel more famous then. But a week later, I was more famous because I just got the hair done that day. He knew that was going to catapult me into another stratosphere of publicity and press and all that, because all of a sudden, instead of just being featured in the New York Times, Art in America, and the Village Voice, all of a sudden I was in Vogue and People magazine and fashion TV shows and stuff, because the press likes an artist to have a certain look, like Andy himself with his wig, and David Hockney with the glasses, Salvador Dali with the mustache, and I was like an 80s, I guess, new wave kind of guy, with hair like Billy Idol, and then I started wearing designer clothes, and that all helped make me have success beyond the art world, because image is such an important thing, and visibility. To have success in the art world, you have to have all these ingredients, like I explained before. You have to have a story and recognizable style. You have to be instantly identifiable, both in your work, but also as your physical presence, because it's a must to go to art parties and schmooze with the curators, the collectors, and other artists, etc. Okay. I didn't really choose Italy. Italy chose me, literally, because in the early 90s, Italian art dealers started coming to my studio in New York and would buy large quantities of my paintings, which they then resold for a quick, big profit. And they knocked on my door like twice a week. And then they started putting on shows of my paintings, and they would invite me to the openings, and I would go, and I fell in love with the country, the people, the food, the architecture, the Caravaggio paintings, and basically the support because they were giving me a lot of money and attention. And I had always thought that I don't want to spend my entire life living in one city, even though New York is more than a city. In the end, there's a provincial aspect to it. I wanted to learn more about the world, and I got a lot of support in Japan too, and I thought about moving there. But people told me that in Japan, the Japanese don't really totally accept foreigners. But the Italians love Americans especially, and so they made me feel at home. They invite me to Christmas dinner and Easter dinners and lunches, and so I really feel like adopted by the Italians. And I chose Rome specifically because my friend in Milan said it's better than Milan. It's more uh, central, and all roads lead to Rome, and that's actually true because all my friends have visited me in Rome, not just to come to see me. They're going to see the Colosseum, and I happen to be there, so I take them out to lunch and dinner, and I don't feel isolated in Rome. I probably would in Tuscany, where I eventually will probably end up when I want to feel a little more isolated in like a Renaissance villa or a medieval castle, living, with cats outside and vineyards and all that. But at the moment, I'm still only 57 years old, and I'm still actively involved with the art scene. And Rome is great. There's Achille Bonito Oliva, Enzo Cucchi, Vittorio Sgarbi, all these great art world personalities, larger than life personalities. Bruno Colella, the director, great musicians who are also artists like Tony Esposito, who I collaborate with a lot, who's also in the movie. And it's just a constant party in Rome. Everybody's just having a party, but not in a stupid way. I mean, they're intellectuals. They debate, they recite poetry, they talk about art, and I like it a lot. I don't want to abandon New York totally, but so I do 50-50. I try to be in Rome when the weather is not so nice in New York. And I just have this other parallel life there. Life in Italy is so great. For me, being a successful artist, they say per un artista con pancia pieno va bene, pero per uno di noi è disastro, which means Italy is good if your stomach is full, but if you're an emerging, struggling artist, then it's a disaster. And I probably agree with that. If you're a young artist who wants to be rich and famous, you shouldn't go to Rome. You shouldn't go to Italy. You should go to New York and follow the 6 rules of how to become a rich and famous artist. Rule number 1, make great art. Rule number 2, live in New York. Rule number 3, circulate. Rule number 4, be professional. Rule number 5, have a story. And rule number 6, get other people to work for you.